and for bovine burping. Be happy to yield to my esteemed chairman.
Chair recognizes
Madam President,
West Virginia.
The Senator has the floor. I thank him for yielding. Would he be willing to enter into a time agreement on the amendment?
I'd be delighted to enter into a time agreement.
Could we say, what would the Senator suggest? Would the Senator suggest?
I would suggest an hour.
Hour equally divided?
Equally divided.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that there be 1 hour time limit on this amendment, and that the time be divided and controlled in accordance with the usual form, provided further that no intervening amendment or amendment in the second degree may be in order.
Without objection?
I object.
Chair recognizes Senator from
But only for the
Idaho.
purpose of an inquiry. I understand.
The Senator has the floor.
I understand that the leadership is not here at the moment, is coming back soon, and I think they were trying to work out a time certain. Would it be possible for the chairman to withhold his UC for a moment until that time can be determined?
Well, if I can't get agreement on it, I'll have to. It can be objected to, but the Senator should understand that, and I'm sure he does, that as soon as that Senator yields the floor, who's offered the amendment, a Senator can get the floor and move to table. I wanted to accord equal time between the two sides.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman. I was asked to see if we couldn't arrive at a time that was compatible to our leadership.
I wonder if Senator Hatfield can be reached.
I don't believe he is.
Madam President,
Chair
may I say to my colleagues, we have been advised of the leader's schedule. I believe that this hour time agreement proposed by the chairman of the Appropriations Committee would accommodate their needs, and I have indicated to my colleague from Idaho that I would be happy to yield him 5 minutes off of my time, so I think we could accommodate his concerns, and I believe we have adequately accommodated the leader's needs, and we would, if that is not the case, I would certainly join in a unanimous consent request to make further accommodation. But in order for us to give our colleagues some idea of how we're going to proceed, I would hope that we could accept the distinguished Senator from West Virginia's request.
Madam President, would the Senator yield for a further question?
I yield to the...
Madam President, may I say to the distinguished Senator from Idaho, I now understand that both leaders are at the White House, and I would be, suppose we do one of two things. We either have 45 minutes to the side, which will give the leaders time to get back, or we consume the hour, order the yeas and nays, put it aside for another amendment. Which would the Senator prefer?
Well, I would certainly leave that judgment to the chairman.
The Senator from Missouri has the floor.
Would the Senator from Missouri yield?
Madam President, I would suggest that we accept the hour time agreement and make such further accommodations at the end of that period as may be necessary to assist the leaders in their return from their very important meeting.
Well, I thank the distinguished Senator from Missouri, and I also thank the distinguished Senator from Idaho. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent if the Senator will yield to me for that purpose.
I yield.
I ask unanimous consent, Madam President, that there be a time limitation of 1 hour and 30 minutes on the pending amendment, that the time be equally divided and controlled in accordance with the usual form, that there be no intervening or second degree amendments.
Okay. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I thank the distinguished Senator from Missouri, Mr. Bond, and I thank the distinguished Senator from Idaho, Mr. Craig. Madam President, if the Senator will yield just momentarily without his losing his right to the floor, I believe that the subcommittee chairman to the floor. And I ask, well, I don't need to ask unanimous consent for this. I will give that chairman control over 30 minutes of the time, reserving 15 minutes to myself on this side. And I thank the distinguished senator for yielding.
Senator from Missouri.
I thank the chairman. I would ask our colleague from Idaho if he is prepared to move forward. 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Madam President, I yield 5 minutes to the senator from Idaho.
The senator from Idaho is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank my colleague from Missouri for yielding, and let me also thank him for the introduction of this amendment to the stimulus package, which we think is clearly not only symbolic but real in the effort that we are undertaking to reduce deficit spending of the type that we find not in any way necessary for the long-term progress of our country, certainly for the well-being of the taxpayers. As I stand this morning, let me also speak of another issue that is important to me and I think my colleagues here in the Senate. And I am introducing legislation this morning, separate certainly from this and not an amendment, that addresses the whole issue of deficit spending and deficit control. I have invited a good number of my colleagues to join with me this morning in discussing legislation that would give the President of this country a modified line item veto by requiring the expedited consideration of special recension messages submitted by the President upon enactment of appropriation legislation. Senator McCain and others have attempted a pure line item veto, and those efforts may well be attempted again during this session of Congress. But today, Senator Cohen, Senator Kempthorne, and myself introduce a modified line item veto bill, which I will send to the desk within the next few moments. Why has there been so much debate lately and so much debate in the last day on specific items within a supplemental piece of legislation that deals with distinctively different areas of our budget? Largely that is happening, Madam President, because no president can go in and selectively line item out areas of expenditure that we think are unnecessary. It has become the habit of this Congress, rightfully so or wrongfully so, in the last decade, to bundle together varieties of different appropriation bills for different interests, and they stand together as a bundle and not individually. Many of us have argued for a good number of years that really it would be the appropriate approach to allow the President or the executive an opportunity to enter the budget process through the line item veto. And with that in mind, Republicans, Democrats alike have joined on this issue. Whether it be the balanced budget or, more importantly, the line item veto at this moment, testimony has been gathered before the Joint Committee on the Organization of Congress, testimony presented by people like Ross Perot and others from the outside who argue so clearly that greater responsibility ought to be given to the executive branch of government to participate more directly with the Congress of the United States in a selective way to deal with some of these extraneous expenditures that have produced the deficit and that shove our expenditure level. What I am suggesting is that we allow legislative sunlight. In other words, that we allow the light of day to focus on spending that would ultimately wither in the spotlight under the heat of the concentration of this body, or the other body for that matter, if it had to stand alone. The bill that I am introducing today is a companion piece of legislation to H.R. 1013, introduced in the other body by Representatives Charlie Stenholm of Texas and Dick Armey of Texas, along with several dozen other House members. In fact, it is a piece of legislation that may well be voted on today on the floor of the House and more than likely will pass. So I think it's appropriate that I notify this body and that the Senate become aware of an approach to deal with a line item veto in a slightly different version than that which we have dealt with in the past. Last year, H.R. 2164 passed in the House by 312 to 97 votes, with the endorsement of the leadership of both parties in the other body, and it was endorsed by President Bush and the then candidate Clinton. Now our President, President Bill Clinton, supports giving him the authority of a line item veto. So the modified line item veto, or the Expedited Rescission Act, as it is called by some, allows the President to focus scrutiny on items that are hidden and bundled into an omnibus appropriation bill. It will prevent the Congress from ignoring the President's proposals for recession.
The senator from Idaho has used his 5 minutes.
Would my colleague from Missouri yield an additional 5 minutes?
Madam President, I'm pleased to yield an additional 5 minutes to the senator from Idaho.
The senator from Idaho has an additional 5 minutes.
I thank my colleague for yielding. But it does give the President, therefore, the opportunity to step forward and say to the Congress, these are items that I can't find any real necessity for, and why don't we consider them individually? They can either stand together as a group or they can stand alone, and you can discuss them and vote them up or down. I'm going to veto them. I think that gives us, and it certainly gives the President an opportunity to focus on spending items that just appear to be unnecessary. The override, the President's veto, in most instances has required a 2/3. I would prefer to enact a stronger line item veto than the one I'm proposing today, one that would require that. But I think we know that that has been impossible to pass in this Congress, and that's why I stand before you today introducing a modified approach that requires a lesser number of votes to affirm. Under this bill, the President would have 3 days after the date of the enactment of an Appropriation Act to transact or to submit a special message and draft bill proposing a recension within the Act. A majority or a minority leader in the House of Representatives could have 2 legislative days to introduce by request the President's recension package. The House must vote on final passage of the recension package within 10 legislative days from the time of the introduction of the bill, Madam President. The Clerk of the House would have 1 calendar day to engross, to certify and transmit the House-passed recension bill to the Senate. The Senate must then consider and vote on final passage within 10 legislative days after the recension bill is transmitted from the House. If the Senate does not strike any item of recension from the House-passed bill, it then goes to the President for signature. That gives you an idea of the ability of the House and the Senate to work together in this. That is what would be provided in the legislation I'm proposing today. Under the bill, the President's recension package could not be amended. However, the question may be divided. In other words, if he were to veto within package and submit a variety of items within a package, those issues could be divided out if 50 members of the House or 15 members of the Senate stood in support of dividing that effort up. I will not go any further than that. The legislation is now before us. I hope that at the appropriate time I can either offer it as an amendment or I can work with leadership in getting a standalone vote. It is clearly time that the Congress of the United States worked in a cooperative manner with the executive branch in crafting appropriation in a way that is acceptable to the American people. Hour after hour over the last several days, we have had items that clearly are excessive spending, better known as pork, come before this body, be targeted and debated on, and the American people standing by saying, is it possible that that kind of legislation could have passed the United States Congress? My colleague from Missouri today introduced legislation to take $23 million out of the budget that was designated for the purpose of studying gases passed by livestock. Now, it's very, very difficult for the average taxpayer in this country to understand why we're spending their money for those purposes, whether it be a line item veto or the modified line item veto recension act that I am introducing today. Clearly, if that had been in place, this legislation or this amendment would not be before us today. It is a clear and perfect example of the type of taxpayers' money being spent in the inappropriate way that we're trying to deal with the introduction of this legislation. I want to thank my colleague from Missouri for yielding to me, and I stand in strong support of his amendment and encourage my colleagues to review the modified line item veto legislation that we have just introduced and to work with us in its passage.
Madam President,
Chair recognizes Senator from Missouri.
Since my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not present, I ask that time be charged equally, and I suggest an absence of the quorum.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. 5 minutes, whenever you have.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I yield 5 minutes to the senator from
A
Montana.
quorum call is in progress.
Ask unanimous consent to call for the quorum be dispensed with,
Without objection.
and I yield 5 minutes to the senator from Montana.
Mr. President, would the distinguished senator from Montana yield to me without the time being charged against him?
I'd gladly yield.
President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President, I yield all of the time remaining on this side of the aisle to the distinguished junior senator from Maryland, the Maryland Fireball. I yield all the time. We've heard of the Wabash Cannonball. This is the Maryland Fireball. She is the chairman of the, I still use the old-fashioned language, she's the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over this subject matter. I yield all the time to her, retaining 1 minute at the end for the purpose of moving the table. I thank the distinguished senator for your...
Senator from Montana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my friend from Missouri, Senator Bond, for this 5 minutes. As we go through this supplemental, I guess I should have brought back my little comic strip from Steve McNally that I enjoy very much every morning in the comic strips and the funny papers, and of course I'm getting with some newspapers like maybe you ought to just read the funny papers, do the crossword puzzle, and get rid of the rest of it, because it sort of gives you a down day. Is it every time that everything under this supplemental with regards to this appropriation, and I might add that I serve on the committee. This is my first term on the Appropriations Committee, and am on this subcommittee, and you will be hearing from our very able chairman in just a little bit. But what the senator of Missouri, I want to congratulate him for his leadership, because he's trying to strike some pork out of this budget that sure wouldn't fall under the emergency category. Most of this is silly. It's just silly. When we talk about some of the studies that's being done as far and how it relates to our environment. Cow flagellants and its impact on the atmosphere, as stated by some awfully good people and from an awfully good ag college at Cornell University, tell us that that's been greatly exaggerated. I would want to tell America that cattle numbers continue to decline, but numbers in people continue to increase. And I wonder when we're going to start the study on that. I would ask my good friend from Missouri. But Dwayne Chapman and Thomas Drennan measured the gas passed by cows. They discovered that the methane emitted from one cow in 1 year has the same effect on global warming as the fuel burned to power a single 75-watt light bulb. Now you talk that, and that's thunderbolting information there. Great research, great efficiency in government. And we classify that as emergency? Mr. Chairman, methane emissions from ruminants, the workshop, and I find this pretty funny too, and this is all classified under emergency now, spending the taxpayers' money. It was this workshop was held in Palm Springs, California. Now, folks, I'm an old auctioneer, and I've been to a couple of goat ropings and county fairs and windmill greasings and auctions and things, and I never seen a lot of livestock in Palm Springs, California. But on the other hand, I see the time of it was February 1989. Palm Springs ain't a bad place to hold a workshop in February. Maybe there's another environmental thing that I promote very heavily, and they've got 80 or 90 golf courses down there. That's a good place to study the environment. That's the way I study the environment. I don't have anything against that. That's not meddling when you get over to golf courses. What we're saying here, that we're not striking all the money for research and the different areas and the more we find out about our environment around us. We're taking a little over $20 million out of this supplemental and telling America this is not emergency, this is pandering to some special interests, and we're doing silly things, just silly things that doesn't tell us a darn thing about ourselves, about our planet, and especially when we have to borrow money to do it. Now, we're borrowing money to do this. There is no place in this budget where this is offset. Your children and grandchildren is going to pay interest on this money to do these kind of silly things, and it's time we cut out some of it. Let's really invest in some things that will do us some good. Let's talk about biochemistry and how we control noxious weeds through fungus and genetic engineering, and not use pesticides or herbicides. Let's talk about that. Let's fund those things that make sense. And an area where we know we can do it, and I happen to believe that Montana State University is on the cutting edge of that technology. But let's cut out these silly things. And let's talk about getting a return for the American taxpayer money. And I appreciate my good friend from Missouri. My roots go back to Missouri. We sort of think alike down there. And quit coming up with these silly things, and I call them silly. And we borrow money and pay interest on that money to do them. And the American people have got to know that. We have got to get off of this deficit spending, folks.
Has used the time yielded to him.
I would ask to be yielded one more minute, and then I'll wrap up.
Mr. President, I yield 2 minutes to Senator from Montana.
Senator from Montana.
I'll not use that time, and I thank my good friend from Missouri, but we're going to pay interest. And every time I get up here, I want to remind the American people, deficit and debt are not the same, but one creates the other. If we deficit spend, and that's the difference between the money we take in and the money we spend, that's the deficit. But deficit creates debt. And we pay interest on debt, folks. We're just like any family, any business, all the way across this country. And we're borrowing money to do these silly things. Now, they say, well, it ain't much. You got to start somewhere. You got to start cutting somewhere. And if you don't start, then we never will get into this thing of being more physically responsible than we are now. I come out of county government. We couldn't do these things. If we can afford them, let's do them. If we can afford them, we don't have to borrow the money. But I don't think there's very many families borrowing money to go to a picture show or a movie, and this is silly. Mr. President, I would hope that my colleagues would support this amendment and get back into a real world where we can do real things with the dollars that we've got, and we don't have to borrow them. And I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, how much time do I have?
29 minutes to the senator from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. President, I've been on the floor a number of times defending the President's stimulus package and defending it by articulating what I truly believe are the principles of the President's stimulus package, which is to generate jobs today and generate jobs tomorrow, and to enhance the private sector in a way that would sustain the recovery process. During that debate, I've dealt with a myth, one myth, which I'll articulate, and another that will be part of this discussion with the senator from Missouri. First, myth number one, that somehow or another funding the stimulus package adds to the deficit, where we believe that public investment will bring down the long-term debt and deficit of this country. Practical example, every 1% of unemployment costs the federal treasury $28 billion in both lost revenues and also the federal programs and local programs that, or funding of other programs that help the unemployed. So whatever we do that brings down the unemployment does deal with federal spending in a positive way. If we bring down the unemployment by 1%, that will be a $28 billion garnering to deal with the deficit and the debt. But at the same time, the stimulus package is meant to lay the groundwork not only to generate immediate jobs, but long-term and leverage other jobs in this country. That's why I support the stimulus package. Now let us go to the argument that is being used to deal with the green programs at EPA, which are voluntary arrangements with the private sector to increase their productivity and their profitability by going green. The argument is that this is not emergency spending. The issue is not on what we spend the money on. That might not be the emergency. What is the emergency is the fragile nature of the recovery and the fragile nature of America's private sector, who have, by their organizational charts, their attitudinal thinking, are stuck in a Cold War mentality. We know that America's private sector is changing, and they need all the help that they can get to change in order to increase their productivity. And going green is one of the best ways to do it. Corporation after corporation can tell you that going green, meaning to move more to an environmentally sensitive area, is actually saving them money, enabling them to develop new products for the marketplace or enhance their own products for the marketplace, and that it is increasing both profitability and productivity. Any money that we can spend to meet with the emergency that is going on in America's private sector to help them to be fit for duty for the 21st century and to increase their productivity, their profitability, and thus their employment and their asset to the United States of America, I regard as spending the money. And you talk to those top tycoons the way I have, and you will see that this is an area where they see dual use. It enhances their productivity, it enhances their profitability, enhances their ability to either retain or recruit new employees, and at the same time, we come up with ways to conserve energy, to deal with emissions that are destructive to our environment, and we get a multiple green buck effect for the spending of our money. Mr. President, these aren't boutique green items. This isn't taking a bumper sticker from an environmental movement and funding a good intention. This is practical applications with America's private sector. This wasn't invented by a think tank. This was invented by Bill Riley, a Republican administrator during the Bush administration, who knew that going green was a great way to go. But the way to go green was not through more tightening regulatory requirements, not more mandates on local government, but by helping America's private sector to think green, go green, and to do it now. They came up with a variety of approaches, from identifying energy-efficient products to encouraging industry to commercialize, to converting some of their processes that they use in both production to do it, and yes, changing light bulbs. Now, boy, does that invite jokes. You know the old jokes, how many senators does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it depends on what committee you're on. This is not light bulb jokes. The changing of the light bulbs shows that energy-efficient lighting will cut the American electric bill by $19 billion, but by reducing air pollution by 4 to 7%. So changing the light bulbs changes our economy. And it changes our economy in a very constructive way. Somebody's got to design that light bulb. Somebody's got to be the architect of the future, and those are jobs for our high tech. Somebody's going to manufacture those light bulbs, and wow, wouldn't it be great if America got back into the manufacturing business. Somebody's got to sell them, somebody's got to install them, and that generates those jobs. And at the same time, it will save America's private sector $19 billion. Wow. Now, is this pie in the sky? Sure, you know, they might be at a conference. Like my colleague from Montana, I go wild when they want to go off to conferences. I see that every time. Sometimes I know that there are those who like to talk about the problem and those who like to solve the problem. I know my colleague from Montana likes to solve problems as my colleague from Missouri. That's why I thought this program would have such appeal for them. Because, like, who has benefited? Who has worked with EPA? Well, let's take Preston Trucking in Maryland. This is a partner that received the Maryland Energy Award from Governor William Donald Schaefer, who endorsed George Bush in the last election. Governor Schaefer gave Preston Trucking an energy award because of Preston's successful energy conservation program to deal with a new lighting system. Preston now uses 40% less energy, and it's going to save that trucking company $20,000 a year. Now, that might seem small, but you be a small business in a changing economic environment that is becoming more competitive, and that saved $20,000 either means improved profitability, or it might mean that you can enhance the health insurance for your employees. Now let's go to the Amoco Corporation. They work with that Green Lights charter. They were a charter partner to the Green Lights thing. Recently, they replaced 6,000 light switches with 6,000 occupancy sensors in their office and laboratory buildings. Now, what's an occupancy sensor? It means that when nobody's in the room, the light goes out. What did that do? It saved Amoco $316,413 per year in just one area at their Napersville, Illinois office and laboratory building complex. Wow, 300 grand. Then let's go to Elkhart General Hospital in Indiana. They were a Green Light partner. Now, they're a small institution out there trying to give high-tech, high-touch care, yet they have an enormously high electricity bill because it's associated with hospitals, not only to run the high-tech equipment, but because of heating and air conditioning, crucial to patient care. Now, they upgraded the installation of new lamps, electronic ballast, occupancy sensors, time switches, and then they ended up saving more than $100,000 in annual energy sales. For a hospital, a small hospital, to save 100 grand, wow, you talk about cost containment in America's health reform proposal. Maybe we ought to make sure that energy efficiency is one way to do that. We could go to corporation after corporation that I could name. The Oliver Car Company in Maryland, in the District of Columbia, has done it. Johnson & Johnson, Boeing, all have done this. Boeing, as they're fighting for their life, will tell you that by being a green charter and what they learned from this helped them upgrade many buildings and drop their energy use by 50%. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. These are real opportunities for saving money and saving the environment. And to cut this out and say, well, it's not an emergency, well, I'll tell you, for a lot of those companies, those hospitals and so on, what they're up against is an emergency. What they're up against is an emergency, and that's why spending this money will help them. Mr. President, I'm going to further reflect on other things I might say so that I will yield the floor but not yield back the time. How much time do we have?
18 minutes, of which 1 minute is reserved to the President pro tempore.
I thank the chair.
Mr. President,
Senator from Missouri.
how much time do I have left?